Hi, my name is Daniel Kleinman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Seaworthy Collective, a startup community and venture studio specifically serving ocean impact based in Miami, Florida. Today, I'm going to talk to you about empowering innovation for regenerative ocean impact. And I wanted to start today by really reflecting on what brings our community together. And as you know, this week we inaugurated a new president, President Joe Biden, and he's made a major call for unity. And I think really reflecting on the basics of what brings their community together is something that can help really instill that. And the answer to that question is, of course, our why, our shared passion for the betterment of our oceans and planet. And I think it's key to really recognize that passions have no limitations, whether it's geography, whether it's your academic background or degree, your socioeconomic status, where you come from or what your culture is, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, even your political party. You can be passionate about whatever you want, and no one or no societal limitation can tell you differently. And I think it's really important to emphasize this as we try to build a more inclusive field. And so my passion was really inspired by James Cameron's dive to the Marianas Trench back in 2012. That was actually the end of my freshman year when it happened, and the 1 week I ever spent on Twitter. And when James Cameron did this feat, it really highlighted to me the opportunity of just how little we know about the oceans, and at the same time, the technical challenge of getting to the deepest part of the ocean. James was only the third person to get to the Marianas Trench at the time in history. More people had at that point been to the moon than the bottom of our oceans. And at the same time, I've always been a staunch environmentalist. And Victor Vescovo actually repeated James' feat in 2019 during the 5 Deeps expedition, but at the same time actually found evidence of anthropogenic impact at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And so that really kind of wrapped it all together for me in saying, this is exactly why we need to do what we do. We don't even know it's down there and we're already polluting it. And so this notion of following your passion, I think, is something really important to put into context. Specifically for millennials and early career professionals, this is a guiding virtue that our parents have really instilled in us when it comes to pursuing our field and our professions. And for me, that was instilled by my dad, who is an entrepreneur and engineer himself. And so this term, follow your passion, actually has even increased 9-fold in books since 1990. And so for me, my journey started at the University of Florida, getting my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And during that time, I got to become a University Innovation Fellow, who are students in innovation and entrepreneurship from all over the world. We get to spend a week at Stanford and Google and immerse ourselves in design thinking and systems thinking, which very much is what led into Seaworthy. At the same time, I got to intern at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I got to do conceptual design for unmanned underwater vehicles, specifically working on the Clio project, which was a vertically profiling AUV, or autonomous underwater vehicle, that took biogeochemical samples at different layers of the oceans. But after I graduated, I ended up getting a job working in Boston for Bluefin Robotics as a pilot and test engineer for their vehicles, pictured there. And during my time there, they ended up getting bought out by defense contractor General Dynamics 6 months into me working there. And so after 2 years in Boston, I realized that the work-life balance and overall culture just didn't really align with my values. And so I found an opportunity to actually get a job offer in San Diego to work for the Navy doing R&D for them. And that job really checked 9 out of 10 boxes of what I was trying to accomplish with my career, but that 10th box was my passion. And after 3 years of working there, I knew I needed to really align myself with that passion and go for it. And so that's when I found this opportunity in Miami to get my master's at the Rosenstiel School for Marine and Atmospheric Sciences in ocean exploration science. And at the same time, all throughout this time, I've been working on developing Seaworthy Collective, starting the business plan summer of 2019. And we officially launched in September of last year. And all together, the one thing I want to reflect on this is that none of this came easy. This was all very much, really running into the barriers of not having a specific degree for this field, right? I'm a mechanical engineer. There was no ocean engineering program at the University of Florida. And so with that, I really want to highlight those barriers as something critical that a lot of people getting into the field have to overcome. Now, there's one other point I want to raise, which is why I put a date under the picture of this photo. And that's kind of just some of my guiding views in general that also relate to the field. And so for me, this picture was actually taken June 23rd of 2016. And actually, quite literally on that same boat with that same vehicle the next day, I got the news that my dad passed away. And it was very sudden and tragic. And with that, it definitely made me a grounded realist, and something that I think a lot of people our age, don't get a chance to be until later in life. And so that really kind of as you'll go through the presentation with me today, really resonate as you see my approach to the field. And so furthermore, in my time in industry, I noticed a couple really critical trends. And number one was starting at Woods Hole. So I worked on this Clio project, and it was an amazing experience, really validated my passions for ocean science, exploration, and conservation, and the technologies and innovations that support it. At the same time, the opportunity after I graduated to get hired back full time wasn't there because public funding to support the project had been dwindling or stable at best. And so it highlighted this real urgent need of the field, that the fact is the funding is if dwindling or stable even, no matter what, it's not supporting bringing together more people to actually support innovation. And as a result, these are businesses that have to stay in business. And so they're taking on private interest money like fossil fuels and defense money. And that's okay. We all have to stay in business. We all have to keep jobs. It's, there's no shame in it. But at the same time, as an innovation concept, it's monopolizing this pipeline to create solutions. And that was even more stark to me after I worked at Bluefin Robotics, and 6 months into me working there, they got bought out by a defense contractor, and I ended up going from all different applications of underwater vehicles to specifically focusing on defense. And then to wrap it all up and really full circle it, after I spent the last 3 years in San Diego, seeing, working on the Navy base and seeing folks from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in and out of my lab, I truly realized that ocean science was very much happening as a byproduct of serving these interests rather than for the sake of ocean science and innovation alone. And thankfully, I was proven that I was not crazy, and there is now numbers to back it up. Only recently, in the last couple of weeks, this report by Duke and Stockholm University actually put data to my strong and longly held beliefs that the largest corporations are accounting for the majority of the market share and the majority of opportunities, specifically fossil fuels and defense. And so that alone truly limits the opportunities for innovation, taking up such a large market share and limiting the opportunities for me as a millennial trying to pursue my passion. And so it's no surprise that all of us early career professionals raised on this ideal of pursuing our passions are getting into the field and getting pretty jaded about the true reality of what's there. And that is essentially systemic barriers, right? Systemic barriers to actually make impact and do the things that we see to fix the world. And what is that? Well, of course, the environmental problems facing our oceans, which I'm sure many of you know, things like overfishing, plastification, the impacts of global warming. These are all major problems. And when you think about the system as is, what's going to actually facilitate solving these, right? And for me, the driving passion I have underneath all of this is the fact that we've explored under less than 20% of our oceans, and we're on pace to destroy them faster than we can explore them. And so there's this real urgency behind that. And so a lot of us look to the Sustainable Development Goals as kind of the beacon of hope for solving these problems, right? And with that, I'm not going to read this all word for word of the results, but the bottom line is the progress that we're hoping for these goals right now is already behind. We're not making the strides we need to make if we're actually going to change the trajectory of anthropogenic impact on the oceans. And that brings me to one of our core beliefs of Seaworthy, and personally for me as well, which is the fact that sustainability is simply not enough to reverse ocean and climate anthropogenic impacts. The SDGs are absolutely a step in the right direction, but they don't get to the root of the problem. I love using plastics as the primary example of this, where actually recently there were some exposés about recycling being completely ineffective. But in general, even if it was, recycling plastics still perpetuates the problem of plastics being in the supply chain. It doesn't solve ocean plastics if we're still finding ways to keep them around, right? We need to fully invest in alternatives if we're actually going to get them out of the supply chain and make sure that if things do end up in the ocean, they're biodegradable and safe for marine wildlife. Beyond that, as I mentioned, with 90% of fish stocks at least exploited, sustainable yields still maintain this level of exploitation. It doesn't allow the fish to actually regrow populations. It keeps them in the state. Furthermore, even with greenhouse gas emissions, right? If we kept things at the current state, it would still be an adverse environmental stressor with facilitating hurricanes and all the other impacts of the level of current greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we think about sustainability essentially as mitigation, it's this incremental step, which absolutely is needed, a step in the right direction, but it can't be the end goal. It's not enough. And so that brings me to the overall kind of synthesis of these problems. The fact that ocean science and innovation can't settle for primarily being a byproduct of serving these private interests. So the point is, where are these solutions going to come from if the system isn't supporting developing them? And that is startups. That's innovation, right? That is the beauty of
building things outside of current frameworks. And when I look around, some of these are some of our strategic collaborators, like the Climate Foundation, who are developing carbon sequestration through seaweeds. And of course, a lot of you may know the Ocean Cleanup, who have been leading the efforts on battling the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Ocean Era, formerly Kampachi Farms, leading the way on aquaculture. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and truly, until the system catches up, entrepreneurs are leading the way. And so that brings me to another key point, which is ocean optimism. Of course, I'm an optimist. We all want to be optimistic about the future. But at the same time, we need to put it in context of where we're at right now. And the point is, number one, the current system and silos for ocean innovation are not going to enable the production of solutions to actually solve the problems of our time. Until we admit that, we're going to be continuing to perpetuate this unrealistic expectation that we can magically produce these solutions without the things to facilitate them. Furthermore, as I mentioned, sustainability is simply not enough, and we need to think bigger and broader and actually getting to solving the root cause of the problem. And so what that is regeneration, and I'll get into that momentarily, as well as systemic change. Systemic change to enable these vehicles for developing innovation pipelines that actually solve these problems, enable prototyping, and really develop the future of what we should be expecting for these ocean innovation pipelines. Which brings me to Seaworthy Collective. So first, let's talk about regeneration. So as I mentioned, we are currently really in this state of exploitation, right? This is where we're at right now, where basically what we take from nature exceeds its capacity to recover from it, right? If we continue on this trajectory, we know that sea life isn't going to be around much longer, or we're going to have more plastic than fish in our oceans in the next 30 years. So we aspire for sustainability currently, right? Which is basically saying we take as much as nature can allow. That's great, but that keeps it at where it's at, right? That's what sustaining is. But the key thing we actually should be aspiring for is allowing nature to recover, where we have natural populations that are in abundance for us to truly be able to have sustainable yields, where we can say this fish population is recovering, that tuna isn't so scarce that oftentimes when people order tuna, it's other red fish meat and they don't even know it, right? That is absolutely symptoms of exploitation, and we need to think, if we're actually going to solve the root problem, we would rather deal with surpluses than shortages. And so that gets to why we launched Seaworthy Collective. There's truly the systemic lack of opportunity to catalyze solutions for these greatest problems facing our oceans. And as I've mentioned, the new blue economy must be regenerative and not just sustainable, focusing on building these solutions rather than just mitigating them. And we're doing so tangibly. And out of anywhere, as a native South Floridian, we know we are ground zero for anthropogenic impact, whether it's hurricanes, sea level rise, algal blooms, we've got it all. We win the lottery on environmental problems these days. So it's up to us to truly try to reverse this trend if we have a chance of quite literally not being underwater. And so who we are, we launched, as I mentioned, in September of last year, and I've already built out a team of 18 diverse students, early career professionals, both grad and even undergrad, and from a wide variety of backgrounds, from angel investing and incubator program management to, of course, the ocean space as well. And so our mission is to empower a community of current and aspiring entrepreneurs to innovate for regenerative ocean impact. And one of the things that I've truly learned on this entrepreneurial journey is that value-driven business is a critical piece of how we have to operate in aligning with these values. And so the top values I truly perpetuate are authenticity, and going into this truly for the sake of impact, as well as empathy to get people to truly understand why we need to do what we do. And so Seaworthy Collective is primarily, first and foremost, a startup community, and everything we do is based out of this community. And then we facilitate that with our venture studio, which I will get into momentarily, that co-creates and crowdsources startups to develop collective ocean innovation pipelines at scale. We do that by partnering with local incubators and accelerators to tailor or verticalize their programs to serve these pipelines. And we're able to do that as this hybrid 501c3 and LLC social impact joint venture model that allows for the creation of business cases for this regenerative ocean impact. And so a venture studio is a relatively new model that kind of flips the script on what incubators do. We seek to co-create startups with co-founders from our community. And we do that by providing the strategic direction. We have, instead of incubators that seek out people with ideas, we have the ideas. We know the areas that have the most potential for impact, and we want to co-build solutions around those areas. And furthermore, we look to bring in the capital to actually facilitate growing these startups. And so it's a relatively new model. It's been around for a little over 10 years. And we're actually the first ones really focused on ocean impact as a venture studio in the continental US. We're also, as I mentioned, working on building these innovation pipelines and resources that's going to support South Florida's first ocean impact focused incubator and accelerator. And so to tie things back to the Drake meme earlier, we are building these pipelines from our venture studio and pitch competition programs to democratize and diversify these opportunities for interdisciplinary ocean impact innovation and entrepreneurship, catalyzing this systemic change by empowering current and aspiring entrepreneurs to overcome these silos, and driving the development of a regenerative blue economy that solves and not just mitigates the ocean's greatest problems. And so how we've done that is already building up this network of mentors and collaborators that's over 30 large now. And they span both the innovation and entrepreneurship space as successful founders and CEOs, as well as people with experience in the ocean science and exploration field. Beyond that, we also leverage strategic collaborators, organizations willing to lend their network, resources, people, and be accessible to this community. Furthermore, South Florida has no shortage of resources, both as an innovation and entrepreneurship hub. As many have heard, Silicon Valley expats are now kind of aggregating in Miami now that they can work remotely. And furthermore, of course, there's an amazing amount of marine research and business here as well. And so some of our strategic collaborators we've been able to get on board include the Kleinman Foundation, Ocean Exchange, who has multiple $100,000 funds for sustainable solutions, and of course, my university, University of Miami, and some other amazing organizations. And so we leverage this network to first and foremost build this community, and that starts with our panel events. So we focus on two different sides, kind of both ends of the spectrum. One where we inspire people with deep dives into expertise, and on the flip side, educating people on the absolute basics of what it means to get into the ocean space. So things like introducing the concept of the blue economy, or design thinking and sustainability, or taking the deeper dive and going into innovation for scientific discovery, talking with my colleague at Woods Hole about using underwater vehicles for finding a treasure ship off the coast of Colombia. There's just so many different aspects to this field. And for those, especially from the outside looking in, it's really important to democratize this opportunity. Furthermore, we have our pitch competitions that allow us to crowdsource startups and not just focus on co-creating them. And that allows us to build that collective pipeline. And last but not least, of course, our venture studio, as well as our partner incubator and accelerator programs. So furthermore, how we finance that is all based on our sponsors and partners. We focus on bringing on sponsors for philanthropic impact, as well as corporate sponsorships, and investing partners who, of course, seek equity stakes in our startups, as well as educational resources on getting up to speed on the space. And so this is where we get into the real meat of the matter, which is our co-created startups. And this is really wrapped up in our opportunities for sea change, the 6 areas that we really see providing these solutions that can drive change. But before I dive into each, the key thing you guys need to understand is that it isn't about each solution independently allowing or creating change and enabling a regenerative blue economy, but rather building these collectively to allow for a greater potential for impact. And so, for example, we can start with regenerative ocean food sources like a fish farm, or aquaculture, and tie that in with a seaweed farm that basically offsets the fish waste, right? Absorbs the fish waste, which allows us to grow seaweed, more food. And then seaweed also acts as a major decarbonization or carbon sequestration tool. And that all can be buoyed by a coastal resilient mangrove forest to prevent it from being washed away by erosion. And at the same time can be tended to so that any plastic pollution in the water can also be removed. And all of that can be monitored by ocean technology, which may even be powered by ocean energy. So there are plenty of different ways to connect the dots between all of these. And by co-creating solutions together, we can design them as collective systems. And it's a really exciting thing that I can't wait to pursue. So with that, this is really the overview of the entire model. And that, again, all starts with our community, which at the end of this, you'll all be invited to join. Our startup community, of course, with our mentor and collaborator network, our regular events of panels and workshops, and our sponsors and partners all come together for these opportunities for sea change, which are open now. And that feeds into this venture studio, where we hope to co-create 6 startups, one for each of the opportunities for sea change. And combining that through a pitch competition with existing startups already out there to build this overall ocean innovation pipeline. Altogether, we partner with these existing incubators and accelerators, which, as I mentioned, we're currently talking to one already here in South Florida about that, and look to launch a total of at least 10 total startups for the year. But the best part about this model is it isn't about just being in one place. This is something that is entirely scalable. We can go to other cities with existing innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems that also have potential for a regenerative blue economy, and really partner with that ecosystem to develop this whole economic driver. And so it's about building regenerative blue economies from the ground up. And so overall, this is our view really for the future and for the ocean decade. It's creating this future that is collaborative, inclusive, accessible and diverse, interdisciplinary, doesn't fear failure, but actually embraces it as a tool. That is one of the key points of innovation. And is also full of democratized opportunities that don't have barriers, and more than anything, is collective. And so with this scalable model, we truly build these innovation pipelines in South Florida and beyond, facilitating this collective innovation that can expand to more cities with regenerative blue economy potential. And as I mentioned, we're now just starting to seek initial sponsors and philanthropic support, as well as catalytic capital and prospective investing partners for startups as well. And so if you want to get involved with us, of course, you can go to our website. We have a mailing list that you can join at the bottom of our homepage that also will get you on our Slack group. You can also apply for opportunities for Sea Change. They're open all the way through at least March. And for that, you can apply to become a Venture Studio co-founder or Venture Studio startup co-founder, or submit your existing startup for consideration for our pitch competition. You can also join our next panel event, which we're having next week with 5 gyres and adventure scientists discussing marine plastics. And furthermore, if you're someone who would enjoy mentoring or lending your resources to our cause, you can join our mentoring collaborator network. We're always looking for more people to expand our resources. And finally, of course, we're just starting to seek funding and would love to talk about any of you about sponsorship and partnership opportunities. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time. I really have enjoyed this opportunity to share our vision with you all. Our social media is all there, and our website is. We'll share it in the chat as well and on the follow-up, I believe. But these are the discussion questions for today, which are: what do you see as your own barriers to transform your research into solutions and applications? And what kind of ocean solutions are most pressing, as well as what challenges are there to implement them? Thank you all so much for your time.